The Courage to be Disliked by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga. Chapter 1. The World is Simple but Not Easy. When I first dove into The Courage to be Disliked, it hit me how differently it approaches life. This isn't one of those motivational books telling you to chase happiness like it's some trophy. It's more like a wake-up call, one that forces you to question the way you've been living and what really drives you. The first chapter is basically the foundation of the whole philosophy, Adlerian psychology. Alfred Adler, one of Freud's contemporaries, believed that life isn't controlled by our past, not by trauma, not by childhood, not by circumstances, but by the meaning we choose to give to those things. That alone changes the game, because it means we're not victims of what happened to us. We're responsible for what we do next. I'll be honest. That idea can be uncomfortable. We live in a culture obsessed with what happened to me. We love our stories of struggle. We build identities around pain. My parents didn't support me. My ex ruined my trust. I grew up with nothing. Those things might all be true, but according to Adler's view, none of them define your direction. What defines it is what you decide to do about it now. It's a tough pill to swallow because it takes away your excuses. You can't hide behind, I am the way I am because of my past. You have to face the truth. You choose how to interpret your past. Here's how I see it. Your life is like a car, and the past is just the rearview mirror. It's there, you can glance at it to stay aware, but if you keep staring at it, you'll crash. Most people live like that, always looking back, blaming something that's long gone for why they're not moving forward. The philosopher in the book says something that really sticks. People fabricate their own anger, fear, and unhappiness. That might sound harsh, but he's saying our emotions are tools we use to get certain results. Like, if I get angry, maybe I'm using that anger to control a situation. If I'm constantly anxious, maybe it's a way to avoid doing something that scares me. It's not that we're victims of emotion, we're participants in it. That's powerful. Because once you accept that, you start taking full ownership. You stop saying, I can't help how I feel, and start asking, why am I choosing to feel this way? Another major idea from this chapter, life is simple, but not easy. Adler's view of psychology is all about simplicity. He says, happiness, confidence, and peace aren't complicated. They come down to taking responsibility for your choices, staying present, and not being controlled by your desire for approval. But even though that sounds simple, actually doing it takes guts. Think about it. It's simple to say, I'll stop caring what people think. But when you start living that way, turning down invites, saying what you actually believe, walking away from people who drain you, suddenly, you see how not easy it is. Most people would rather be accepted than be free. And that's the real courage the title talks about, the courage to be disliked. You have to be okay with not being understood. You have to be okay with some people calling you selfish, arrogant, or weird, just because you're choosing your own path. That's the shift. The moment you stop living to please others, you stop being a puppet. When I think about it in my own life, I've noticed the times I felt most frustrated were the times I was trying to make everyone happy. As soon as I started focusing on what actually aligns with me, what I believe, what I value, what I want to create, life became clearer, not easier, but cleaner. So to me, this first chapter is a challenge. It's asking, do you have the courage to take ownership of everything in your life, including your emotions and your story, and stop blaming the past? If you do, the world suddenly becomes a lot simpler. Not perfect, not easy, but simple. Because when you stop living like a victim, you start living like a man with direction. Chapter 2. All problems are interpersonal problems. This is where the book gets real. The philosopher drops a truth that shakes the whole conversation. All problems are interpersonal problems. Every bit of stress, insecurity, jealousy, anger, or frustration we feel, it all comes back to our relationships with others. At first, that sounds exaggerated, right? You might think, what about financial problems? What about career struggles? But if you look closer, Adler's point hits hard. Even those problems are about how we feel in comparison to others. We're not upset about what we have or don't have. We're upset about how we stack up against the people around us. That's ego. That's pride. And that's where most people get stuck. Let's be real. Society trains us to live competitively. From school to work to social media, we're always comparing. Who's doing better? Who's more successful? Better looking? Happier? But the moment you start living in comparison, you automatically put yourself below or above someone else. Either way, you lose peace. Adler's view flips that. He says, life isn't a competition. You're not running against anyone else. You're just trying to live your own story. When you stop comparing, life stops feeling like a constant race. And I'll tell you from my own experience, when you really internalize that, it changes how you move through the world. You stop chasing validation. You stop needing to prove something. You just do what matters to you. That's the real kind of freedom most people never experience. Now, there's another concept in this chapter that hits just as deep: the separation of tasks. This one's a game changer. It's about knowing what's your responsibility and what's not. Here's how it works. Every time you worry about how someone else sees you, or you get frustrated because someone doesn't like you, you're stepping into their task. Their opinion of you is their business, not yours. Adler calls it separating tasks, meaning stay focused on what you can control: your words, your actions, your effort. Don't waste energy trying to control how others respond. Think about it. You can give your best at work, but you can't control if your boss recognizes it. You can be genuine with someone, but you can't make them like you. You can express what you believe, but you can't make everyone agree. When you understand that, you start conserving energy. You stop trying to fix what was never yours to fix. I've noticed this even in my own interactions. Whether it's clients, friends, or anyone else, once I stopped overthinking how they might interpret what I do, I started feeling lighter. My communication got sharper. My confidence grew, because I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore. And here's the twist. When you stop trying to control others, people actually start respecting you more. Why? Because confidence isn't about dominating. It's about self-possession. You're grounded in who you are, and that's magnetic. Adler's idea of tasks also applies to deeper things, like your parents' expectations or society standards. A lot of people live their entire lives trying to please their family or trying to meet the rules of what success is supposed to look like. But those expectations, they're not your tasks. They're projections of other people's insecurities and desires. Your only real task is to live in alignment with your own purpose. Now, that doesn't mean being reckless or selfish. It means being clear. You can love people deeply without letting their opinions define you. You can respect advice without obeying it blindly. And that's something I've learned personally. When you set those boundaries, your relationships actually improve. They stop being manipulative. They become authentic. Because you're not trying to please, you're just showing up as you. Another important thing this chapter dives into is the desire for recognition, probably one of the biggest traps in modern life. The philosopher says, the moment you start living for approval, you stop living for yourself. Look around. People are addicted to validation, likes, comments, compliments, status. It's endless. But that chase never fills you. It's a treadmill that keeps speeding up. And the more you run, the emptier you feel. The truth is, the only recognition that really matters is your own. When you know you're living in line with your values, when you go to bed feeling at peace with who you are, that's real success. But here's where courage comes in. When you stop living for approval, not everyone's going to like you. Some people will pull away. Some will call you arrogant. Others won't understand your choices. That's okay. That's the price of freedom. You can either live being liked by everyone but miserable inside, or you can live true to yourself and let whoever's meant to stay, stay. To me, this chapter is like a mirror. It forces you to look at where you've been giving away your power, to opinions, to comparisons, to expectations. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because the truth is, most of our suffering isn't about what happens to us. It's about how we interpret it in relation to other people. When you stop seeing life as a competition and you start focusing on your own tasks, everything starts to align. You get clarity. You stop overreacting. You start to feel solid, calm, but powerful. That's what the courage to be disliked really means in this chapter. It's the courage to stand your ground even when others don't understand. The courage to say, I'm not here to live your version of me. Once you master that, every relationship in your life starts to shift. Not because other people change, but because you stop giving them control. And that's when real confidence begins. Chapter 3. Discard other people's tasks. This chapter dives into one of the most liberating and uncomfortable truths in the book. You can't live freely until you stop trying to control what's not yours. It continues expanding on Adler's separation of tasks. But here, the philosopher takes it further, saying, if you want real freedom, you have to learn to let go of everything that isn't your responsibility. Sounds simple, but in practice, this is one of the hardest things to do. Let's break it down. Most of us spend our lives entangled in other people's tasks. We obsess over what they think of us, how they react, whether they approve. We take responsibility for their emotion, their happiness, their disappointment, even their anger. It's like we're constantly trying to manage other people's feelings, hoping that if they're happy, we'll be happy too. But that's a trap. Because once your peace depends on someone else's mood, you're a slave to it. The philosopher in the book puts it this way. When you interfere in someone else's task, when you try to control their opinion, their choices, or their emotions, you're stepping into their territory. And that's where most of life's friction begins. Think about it. You get upset because someone doesn't appreciate what you did for them. You're anxious because your parents disapprove of your decisions. You hesitate to speak your truth because you're afraid someone might get offended. In every one of those moments, you're giving away your power. You're doing someone else's emotional labor and neglecting your own. Here's the mindset shift Adler teaches. You're only responsible for your own actions, not for how others respond to them. That's what discarding other people's tasks means. It doesn't mean becoming cold or uncaring. It means staying centered. It's about respecting others enough to let them live their own lives, even if you disagree. For example, if you give advice and someone ignores it, that's not your failure. That's their task. If you work hard and your boss doesn't appreciate it, that's not your burden. That's their perception. The moment you stop trying to manipulate outcomes, life becomes cleaner, lighter. I've seen this firsthand, whether it's clients, friends, or relationships. The times I tried to please everyone, I ended up frustrated. But when I focused only on what I could control, my work, my boundaries, my actions, everything started flowing smoother. The results improved, but more importantly, my peace did too. Now the philosopher also points out something powerful. When you live this way, people might not like it at first. If you've been the person who always says yes, always helps, always bends to others, the moment you start saying no, it shocks people. They'll call you selfish, distant, or even cold. But that's not on you. That's them projecting because they're losing control over how you used to serve their comfort. And this is where courage comes in again. The courage to stay true to your own tasks, even when others dislike it. Let's be honest, most people want harmony. They want everyone to get along. But harmony built on self-sacrifice isn't peace, it's submission. Real harmony happens when both sides are honest. When you respect yourself enough to say no, and you respect others enough to let them feel however they want about it. There's also an important piece about parenting and relationships in this chapter. The philosopher says that trying to control others, even out of love, still damages both sides, like parents who decide what their kids should do with their lives. They justify it as love, but it's really fear. Fear that their child might fail or make them look bad. That's crossing into the child's task. Same with relationships. Trying to make someone love you, act a certain way, or change who they are isn't love, it's control. Real love respects the boundary between tasks. You do your part. Stay honest, loyal, open, and you let the other person do theirs. It sounds simple, but it takes serious inner strength. Because letting go means trusting that the world won't fall apart if you stop trying to fix it. And here's the paradox. When you finally stop trying to control everything, things actually start falling into place. You stop reacting out of fear or insecurity, and you start acting from clarity. You become more grounded, more stable. That's what makes you magnetic. Not the need to control, but the ability to stay calm no matter what happens around you. One part that really resonated with me was how the philosopher explains freedom. He says, freedom is being disliked by other people. That's wild but true. Because if your happiness depends on everyone liking you, you'll never be free. You'll always adjust yourself, your words, your opinions, your actions, just to keep the peace. But the moment you're willing to be disliked, you're untouchable. You're no longer controlled by approval. That's the courage to be disliked. Not arrogance, not rebellion, just the quiet strength of someone who knows who he is. When I think about how this plays out in real life, it's simple but powerful. Let's say you're building your own thing, a business, an idea, a lifestyle that doesn't fit the norm. Some people will criticize. Some will misunderstand. But if you keep bending to please them, you'll end up building their version of your life instead of your own. So you've got two choices. Live for acceptance and stay stuck. Or live for authenticity and deal with some rejection. I know which one's worth it. Because the people who actually respect you will never ask you to betray yourself. The ones who get uncomfortable when you stand tall are the ones who are comfortable with your weakness. To me, this chapter is all about reclaiming your focus. Stop fighting battles that aren't yours. Stop carrying emotions that don't belong to you. Stop apologizing for having boundaries. Your task is to live honestly, to show up, give your best, and let go of the rest. Once you truly live that way, you don't just gain freedom, you gain peace. And that's something approval will never give you. Chapter 4, Where the Center of the World Lies. By the time you hit this part of the book, you've already accepted some hard truths. That your life isn't controlled by your past, that all problems are rooted in relationships, and that freedom comes from letting go of other people's tasks. Now, the philosopher drops another powerful idea. The world doesn't revolve around you, but that's actually what makes you free. At first, that might sound like a contradiction, but this chapter explains that the reason most people stay miserable is because they place themselves at the center of every story. They believe everyone's watching, judging, or measuring them, when in reality, most people are too busy thinking about themselves. It's a huge mental shift. You're not the protagonist in other people's lives. You're the protagonist in your own. And once you really understand that, your anxiety about how others see you starts to disappear. Think about it. How many times do people not chase something they want because they're afraid of what others might think? Whether it's starting a business, changing careers, dressing differently, or just being honest about what they feel, they hold back because they imagine the world watching. But no one's watching. Everyone's living inside their own head, just like you. That realization alone is freeing. Because once you stop imagining an audience, you can finally start living. The philosopher calls this moving from self-centeredness to community feeling. In other words, stop living as if the world is there to evaluate you and start living as if you're a part of something bigger. But let's be clear. This doesn't mean losing individuality or becoming some people-pleasing saint. It's about shifting perspective. When you move your attention outward to contribution, to connection, to purpose, life becomes less about proving yourself and more about creating something meaningful. That's what Adler means by community feeling. It's the understanding that your life gains value through relationships and contribution, not through status or recognition. The irony is, the more you focus on others in a healthy, non-controlling way, the more confident and fulfilled you become. Because confidence doesn't come from being admired. It comes from being useful. from living with purpose. Let me give it to you straight. When your entire sense of worth and depends on validation, you're always in debt. You constantly need to earn approval to feel good. But when your worth comes from what you give, from the value you create, from the impact you make, no one can take that from you. That's real independence. The philosopher in the book uses a simple example. He says a person who can't find meaning beyond themselves ends up living for applause. And that's a miserable way to live. But someone who focuses on contribution finds fulfillment even in small things. It's not about being famous or important. It's about showing up with purpose wherever you are. In my life, I've noticed that too. When I'm focused only on myself, my goals, my appearance, my image, my mind gets noisy. I overthink everything. But when I focus on the work, the people I help, the things I build, I get calm. It's like all the ego-driven noise fades out, and what's left is clarity. That's what this chapter is about, shifting from self-importance to purpose. Another key point the philosopher makes. Your life is defined by the meaning you assign to it. Adler says there's no universal meaning. You create it. The events in your life, good or bad, only matter through the story you tell about them. That's deep, because it means meaning isn't something you find. It's something you decide. You can look at your struggles as proof you're unlucky, or proof you're built for resilience. You can see failure as humiliation, or as the foundation of growth. Same event, different meaning. That's the ultimate power. No one gets to tell you what your story means. And when you start living with that mindset, the small things stop bothering you. You realize that not everything has to be a competition or a performance. Some things you just do because they align with who you are. This also connects to another idea Adler brings up: horizontal relationships versus vertical relationships. Most people see relationships in terms of hierarchy, above or below. Who's more successful? Who's right? Who has the upper hand? That's vertical. But Adler says healthy relationships are horizontal, equal. Not in terms of skill or role, but in worth. You don't look down on anyone and you don't look up to anyone either. That's rare in our world because everything is built on competition. But when you start treating people as equals, not rivals, not idols, everything changes. There's no jealousy, no resentment, no pretending. You can actually connect. And here's the twist. This horizontal mindset isn't just for relationships, it's also for how you see yourself in the world. You're not below anyone. You're not above anyone. You're just part of the same human story. That humility, not weakness, but grounded confidence, gives you balance. It kills insecurity. This whole idea reminded me of something simple but powerful. The more you focus on trying to matter, the less you actually feel like you do. But when you focus on serving something bigger, your craft, your people, your purpose, that's when you start to feel truly alive. So when the philosopher says the center of the world lies nowhere, what he really means is, it's not about being the center. It's about being connected. You're not the sun. You're part of the galaxy. When you live that way, you don't need to dominate or prove anything. You just are. And that's where the calm confidence of a man truly comes from, when his value isn't dependent on anyone's applause. To me, this chapter is about maturity. It's that point where you stop chasing validation and start giving meaning to your own life, where you stop performing and start contributing. The message is clear. Stop trying to be the center of attention. Be the anchor. Be the steady one who moves with purpose, not ego. Because once you stop asking, what do they think of me? And start asking, what can I give? You stop living like a shadow of yourself and start becoming who you're meant to be. That's where true power is. Chapter 5, to live in earnest in the here and now. By the time you reach this last chapter, the whole picture starts to click. All the philosophy, all the talk about freedom, responsibility, and relationships, it all builds toward one thing: living courageously in the present moment. That's the core of Adler's psychology. The past doesn't control you. The future doesn't define you. You define both by what you do right now. But here's where most people mess up. They live everywhere except the present. They're either trapped in the past, replaying mistakes, guilt, and what-ifs, or they're lost in the future, waiting for the right moment, chasing goals they think will finally make them happy. And meanwhile, life passes by in the one place that actually exists, here and now. The philosopher says something that hits deep. The point of life isn't to be special, it's to be useful. That sounds almost too simple, but it's everything, because most people live trying to prove they're special. Better, smarter, more successful, and that constant chase just drains them. But when you focus on being useful, to your work, to your people, to your purpose, you find peace. It's not about impressing, it's about contributing. And when you start to see life that way, even small things start to matter. The conversation you have with someone who's struggling, the project you finish with real effort, the way you show up every day, even when no one's watching. Those moments are life, not some future version of success, not some highlight reel. This, the present moment, is all you ever get. The philosopher calls this living in earnest, meaning living sincerely, fully, without holding back. Not faking, not performing, just being all in on your own life. And here's the truth, that's harder than it sounds. Because being fully present means facing reality without filters. It means not hiding behind excuses, not escaping into distractions, and not blaming the past or the future. It's raw, but it's real. I've noticed in my own life, the moments I've felt most alive weren't necessarily the biggest achievements. It was when I was completely in it, tattooing for hours, locked in focus, no phone, no noise, just presence. Or when I was with people I genuinely cared about, not trying to impress, just being myself. That's the power of the present. When you stop needing anything outside of it, you start to feel free. Another powerful theme in this chapter is the courage to be ordinary. That sounds almost counterintuitive in a world obsessed with being special. But Adler's point is this. When you're obsessed with being extraordinary, you're still living for comparison. You're still defining your worth against others. But when you accept being ordinary, meaning you don't need to prove your value through comparison, that's when you actually become free to live your life. Being ordinary doesn't mean being mediocre. It means being authentic. It's living without needing a spotlight. It's finding peace in doing what matters to you even if no one applauds. Because here's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to be special, you start standing out naturally. People feel the difference. You're not performing anymore. You're grounded, real. That's rare energy. The philosopher also emphasizes something crucial. Happiness isn't achieved, it's lived. You don't find happiness someday. You create it through the way you live every day. It's not at the end of a career or a relationship or a big win. It's in the way you show up now. Every time you take responsibility for your choices, every time you stop chasing approval, every time you act with integrity, you're already living a happy life. Not because everything's perfect, but because you're in control of your direction. And that's where true peace comes from, knowing you're steering your own ship, regardless of the waves. This chapter also talks about life as a series of moments, not a single goal. Adler says we shouldn't live as if life is a climb toward a final peak, but rather as a dance. There's no destination, just movement, rhythm, and flow. You don't win life, you live it. That might sound philosophical, but it's practical too. Because once you stop treating life like a checklist, once you stop waiting for the next big thing to make you happy, you start appreciating where you are right now. That mindset changes everything. You stop rushing, you stop comparing, you stop looking for permission to start. You realize you're already in it. To live earnestly in the here and now means giving your full effort to the moment in front of you. Whether it's your craft, your relationships, or your growth, you're all in. Not because of what you'll get later, but because it's who you choose to be right now. That's presence. That's integrity. That's courage. And yes, it takes courage, because being fully present means being vulnerable. It means there's no buffer of someday. There's only now. But that's also what makes life real. When you stop hiding behind what could be and you start owning what is, everything becomes sharper. Colors, sounds, emotions, experiences. You stop existing and you start living. The philosopher says that a fulfilled life is simply one lived moment by moment, contributing to others, doing your best, and accepting what comes. That's not resignation, that's mastery. Because when you're living that way, you're not dependent on success or validation. You're free. You're centered. You're at peace with being exactly where you are, and yet still growing every day. To me, that's what this whole book builds toward. Freedom through responsibility, peace through detachment, and happiness through presence. You stop blaming the past. You stop competing with others. You stop trying to be liked. You stop trying to be special. You just live honestly, courageously, fully. And when you do, you realize something powerful. No one has to give you permission to be happy. You can choose it. Right here, right now. That's the real courage to be disliked, to live true to yourself, without fear, without apology, without waiting. You create meaning, you take ownership, you stand tall, and in doing so, you stop just existing and start living like a man who's free. That's the end of the book breakdown, a full circle journey from self-limitation to self-liberation, from needing approval to owning your own path. The courage to be disliked isn't just a book, it's a mindset shift. It forces you to face how much of your life is driven by fear of judgment and the need for approval. The message is simple. Real freedom comes when you stop chasing validation and start living by your own standards. Once you own that, you stop being controlled by your past or by others, and that's where true strength begins. Thank you for listening.